The galaxy had rules about what made a species strong. The Corinthians had shells harder than steel. The Vex could regrow lost limbs in hours. The Solthrene lived for 1,000 years, learning and remembering everything they saw. Humans had none of these things. When Ambassador Chen walked into the council chamber for the first time, she could feel them staring. The Corinthians clicked their mandibles in what might have been laughter. The tall Solthrene looked down with ancient eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. The Vex simply rippled their skin in dismissal. Chun stood in the center of the chamber, small and fragile by their standards. Her bones could break. Her skin could tear. She would be old and gray in just 70 or 80 years if she was lucky. Why should we accept your species? High Arbiter Zalmoth asked. His voice rumbled through the chamber. What do humans bring to the galaxy? Your bodies are weak. You die from things we cannot even feel. You live such short lives that you barely have time to learn anything useful. Chun smiled. It was not a happy smile. We bring memory, she said. We remember our dead. The council members looked at each other. Some seemed confused. Others looked amused. What good was memory? The Solthrene remembered 1,000 years each. What could humans possibly know about memory? Very well, Zalmoth said. We will grant you provisional membership. Perhaps you can serve as merchants or clerks while the real warriors defend the galaxy. Chun nodded and left. She did not argue. She did not need to. Time would teach them. 3 months later, the Devourers came. They appeared at the edge of council space like a plague. No one knew where they came from. They consumed everything in their path, turning entire worlds into feeding grounds for their hive mind. They learned from every species they fought, adapting in real time to any tactic or weapon. The council sent their best fleets to stop them at a system called Kedros. 50,000 Corinthian warriors went to battle, their shells gleaming, their weapons the finest in the galaxy. They were the pride of council military might. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Corinthians were slaughtered. The Vex sent their regeneration cores next. They could heal from almost anything, so they thought they could outlast the enemy. But when the Devourers infected them, they stopped regenerating. They just stopped, standing still as the infection spread. The Solthrene admirals tried their ancient tactics, strategies perfected over centuries. None of it worked. The Devourers learned too fast, adapted too quickly. The council was in chaos. If their strongest warriors could not stop this enemy, who could? We will go, Chun said quietly. Zalmoth turned to her. You? You would send your fragile humans against this? They will be destroyed. Perhaps, Chun agreed. But we volunteer anyway. 12,000 humans jumped into the Kedros system in ships the other species thought were outdated. The Third Human Expeditionary Force knew what they were facing. They knew they would probably die. Before the battle, every human ship performed a ritual. They painted names on their hulls. Thousands and thousands of names. These were not the names of the living. They were names of the dead. Soldiers who had fallen in wars going back thousands of years on Earth. Every ship became a flying memorial. Every Marine wore a patch on their shoulder. Not a patch showing their home, but coordinates to a grave. A grave they would never see again. When the Devourers attacked, they used the same tactics that had destroyed the Corinthians and Vex. They tried to infect the humans, to take over their bodies and turn them into weapons. They found humans who had studied every plague in their species' history. Humans who knew about smallpox and cholera and the Black Death. Humans whose ancestors had survived diseases that killed millions. The Devourers' infections spread slower in human bodies, giving the soldiers time to fight back. The Devourers tried psychological warfare next. They broadcasted images of dying human soldiers, trying to break their spirits and make them run. They found humans who grew up on stories of last stands. Stories of 300 Spartans who held a mountain pass knowing they would die. Stories of soldiers who held positions until the last bullet was gone. Stories passed down for thousands of years about people who refused to run. The battle lasted 4 days. It was brutal and bloody. Ships exploded. Marines died in corridors fighting hand-to-hand against monsters. The human fleet was torn apart, but they won. When it was over, only 3,000 humans were still alive. 9,000 had died, but the Devourers retreated. For the first time in recorded history, they pulled back from a fight. Zalmoth came to the medical ship where Chun was recovering. She had been injured in the fighting, wounds that would have killed most species immediately. But she was still alive, still breathing. How? Zalmoth demanded. You should have run. You should have died. You are fragile creatures, weak, yet you won. Chun looked at the blood bag hanging next to her bed. The blood came from soldiers who had died so that others could live. We are not built from advantages, she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. We are built from graves and grit. Every human alive carries the memory of 10,000 generations of people who refused to quit. She pointed to her wounded arm. We don't have shells like the Corinthians. We don't regenerate like the Vex. We don't live for centuries like the Saltrain. What we have is the memory of everyone who died learning how to survive anyway. We remember the plagues that killed millions, so we learned medicine. We remember the wars that destroyed nations, so we learned tactics. We remember every mistake, every failure, every death. And we make sure it means something. Zalmoth was silent for a long time. You turn your dead into weapons, he said finally. No, Chun corrected him. We turn our dead into lessons. We turn graves into foundations. Every human who died at Kidros, we will remember them. We will study what they did right and wrong. We will teach the next generation. And when the Devourers come again, we will be ready because of what those 9,000 people taught us with their lives. The High Arbiter left without another word. But the Council was watching now. Humanity had their attention. Outside the medical ship, stars burned cold and distant. And on every human vessel, crews were already carving new names into the hulls. 9,000 names. 9,000 lessons. 9,000 reasons to be better next time. That was what it meant to be human. To carry the weight of graves and grit forward into each new battle. To refuse to let the dead be forgotten. The galaxy was beginning to understand. Humans were not strong because of what they were born with. They were strong because of what they refused to forget. 6 months after the battle at Kidros, the Galactic Council had changed. Humans were no longer the joke species, the fragile merchants who could barely survive. They were full members now, with voting rights and military authority. But some species still had doubts. General Sarah Okonkwo stood in front of 200 alien officers at the War College on Luna, Earth's moon. These officers came from 20 different species. They were here to learn how to fight alongside humans. Most of them were not sure they wanted to. Today we talk about planning battles, Okonkwo said. She pulled up a hologram showing a fortress on a hostile planet. The Corinthian way to attack this fortress is to send 3 million soldiers in a direct assault. It takes 6 months. About 8,000 casualties. She changed the display. The Salthrine prefer a siege. They surround the fortress and wait. It takes 40 years, but very few soldiers die. She paused and looked at the assembled officers. The human approach is different. We send 20,000 troops. We bomb the fortress from orbit for 3 days. Then we attack from 17 different directions at once. We expect 60% casualties. A Corinthian officer named Velkoth stood up quickly. His shell was dark with anger. That is not strategy. That is throwing lives away. You would kill 12,000 of your own soldiers? Yes, Okonkwo said calmly. And those soldiers would volunteer. Because that fortress makes biological weapons. Those weapons kill 6 million civilians every year. The Corinthian method saves soldiers, but lets millions of civilians die. The Solferine method ensures victory, but takes so long that 240 million civilians die waiting. The human method trades soldiers' lives now to save more lives overall. A young Vex officer raised a tentacle nervously. General, humans live such short lives already. How do you ask soldiers to make them even shorter? Okonkwo's expression softened. We do not ask lightly, but humans have been making this choice since we learned to fight. We call it the doctrine of acceptable losses. Not because those losses are acceptable to us, but because we learned that refusing to pay the cost often means paying a bigger cost later. She brought up historical records from Earth. Images of massive wars, terrible plagues, desperate last stands. 60 million humans died in one war to stop genocide. Thousands of doctors died treating plague victims, knowing they would get sick too. 300 colonists on Mars died holding a life support building so 8,000 civilians could survive. She looked at each officer in turn. We do not have your regeneration or your long lives. What we have is math. Cold math that asks if spending lives now will save more lives later. You see our casualties and call us reckless. We call it investment. The officers looked uncomfortable. This was not how most species thought about warfare. 3 months later, the theory became reality. The Devourers came back, attacking a Solferine colony world called Illis. 40 million people lived there. The council called an emergency meeting to decide what to do. The Corinthians wanted to wait for reinforcements. The Solferine wanted to evacuate slowly and carefully. They argued for 6 hours while the Devourers established a base on the planet's surface. Admiral James Mwangi did not wait for permission. He took the 5th Human Fleet, 40 ships with 18,000 crew members, and jumped directly into orbit above Illis. The council watched in horror as human ships deliberately crashed into Devourer bioships. The crews evacuated in escape pods at the last second, then used the pods as assault vehicles to reach the planet. They watched as human marines set up defensive positions and held them against waves of enemies, dying one by one but never retreating. The battle lasted 11 hours. The entire human fleet was destroyed. 16,000 humans died, but 40 million Solferine civilians were evacuated safely. In the council chamber afterward, an ancient Solferine named Zarkith stood to speak. He was 1,400 years old. He had seen entire civilizations rise and fall. Tears ran down his face. I called humanity reckless, he said quietly. I was wrong. They are not reckless. They are ruthless with their own lives. They calculate what needs to be done, and they do it without hesitation. They do not waste lives. They spend them. Zalmoth looked at the casualty reports. His mandibles trembled. How do we fight alongside species who view death this way? A human officer named Marcus Webb stood up. He was 63 years old, gray-haired, covered in scars from Kedros. You learn to be worthy of their sacrifice. That is what we do. Every soldier who dies, we carry them forward. We learn from them. We win because of them. Then we carve their names on our ships and make sure the next generation knows why. He pulled up an image of a memorial on Earth. It was massive, kilometers of black stone floating in space. 63 billion names, Webb said. Every human who died in our wars, from the first tribal conflicts, thousands of years ago to yesterday. We add names every day. My daughter's name is there. She died at Kedros. His voice did not break. He had had months to grieve. Now there was only purpose. When humans are born, we are taught about the people who came before us. We learn their names, their stories, their sacrifices. We grow up knowing that we exist because billions of people refuse to quit. That creates a weight, a responsibility. When we volunteer for dangerous missions, we are not being brave. We are being human. We are continuing a tradition that stretches back 10,000 generations. A small Vex officer spoke up. But the pain. How do you live with so much death? Webb smiled sadly. We do not live with it. We live because of it. Every name on that memorial is a reason to keep fighting. If we quit, if we decide the cost is too high, then everyone who already paid that cost died for nothing. That is unacceptable to us. The doctrine of acceptable losses was added to Council military training 3 weeks later. Not every species could use it. The psychological cost was too high for species that lived for centuries or could regenerate from death, but they all learned to respect it. And when the Council needed someone to do an impossible mission, when the cost was high and the odds were terrible, they knew who to call. Humanity volunteered every time, not because they were suicidal, not because they did not value life, but because they had learned across 10,000 years of bloody history that sometimes the only way to save lives was to spend them. And they had learned to spend them wisely, to make sure every death taught a lesson and bought something worth having. The galaxy learned to rely on them. And secretly, many species were grateful they did not have to make those choices themselves. Let the humans calculate the cold mathematics of sacrifice. Let them carry the weight of necessary deaths. The humans did not mind. They had been carrying that weight since the first human threw a rock to save their tribe. They were good at it, and every time they added new names to the memorial, they made sure those names meant something. That was the human way, built from graves and grit. Remembered forever. Moving forward anyway, the war with the Devourers had lasted 3 years. Millions had died across dozens of species. The Council had learned to fight back, but every victory came at a terrible cost. The front lines held, but barely. Then the Scouts found something that changed everything. The Devourers had a central nexus, a living brain where their hive mind coordinated everything. It was buried deep inside a planet called Zarvan Prime. Surrounded by 300 infected worlds and protected by biological defenses that destroyed every probe sent near it. The Council War Committee gathered to discuss what to do. If they could destroy the Nexus, the Devourers would collapse into uncoordinated swarms. Easy to defeat, but reaching it seemed impossible. We would have to fight through 100 systems just to get close, Volkov said. His shell clicked nervously. Even with every ship we have, the casualties would be. He paused, searching for the word. Unacceptable. Zalmoth noticed that even the Corinthians were using human terms now. Admiral Okonkwo, he said. Would humanity consider this mission possible? Sarah Okonkwo was older now, her hair gray, her face lined with years of war. She studied the holographic display for a long time. Possible? Yes, survivable? She shook her head. This would require everything we have. Every ship, every soldier. And even then, most would die. Tell us your plan, Zalmoth said. OKONKW pulled up tactical displays showing fleet movements and attack patterns. We send decoy fleets to draw out their defenses. While they are distracted, a strike force of 500 ships with 60,000 troops jumps directly into Zarvan space. They fight their way to the Nexus and destroy it. Expected survival rate of the strike force is 0.2%. The chamber fell silent. Even for humans, those were catastrophic numbers. You want to sacrifice 60,000 soldiers on what is essentially a suicide mission, Elder Zarkith said softly. The ancient Salthrane had become humanity's closest ally after they saved his world. Even for humans, how do you ask this? "We do not ask," Okonkwo replied immediately. "We explain what needs to be done, and they volunteer. They always do. Why?" The question came from Commander Zintara, a Vex who had fought beside humans for 3 years. "I still do not understand. Why give up your already short lives so easily?" Marcus Webb stood up slowly. He was 66 now, far too old for combat by any species standards, but still serving as a strategic advisor. "Come with me," he said. "I will show you." He led a group of council members to Memorial Station, orbiting Earth. It was humanity's newest construction, built during the war. Not a weapon or factory, but a monument. Kilometers of dark stone floating in space, every surface carved with names. 63 billion names, Webb explained as they walked through corridors of the dead. Every human who died in our wars, from 10,000 years ago to last week. We add names every day. It takes a team of 1,000 people working constantly just to keep up. He stopped at a recent section, running his fingers over fresh carvings. Corporal Sarah Chun, age 22, died holding a medical bay so wounded could evacuate. Private James Okoro, age 19, threw himself on a mine to save his squad. Commander Elena Vasquez, age 43, rammed her damaged ship into an enemy vessel threatening a colony. His voice cracked slightly. My daughter, Major Rebecca Webb, age 31, died at Kidros leading a charge to retake the shield generators. Zintara's tendrils trembled. "You carry all of this. The weight of so much death?" "We do," Webb confirmed. "Because if we forget, if we decide the cost is too high and stop fighting, then everyone who already paid that cost died for nothing. That is the weight of remembrance. Every name here is a debt we owe. Not to let their sacrifice be meaningless. Not to waste what they bought with their lives." He pulled up volunteer statistics for the Zarvan mission. 60,000 slots available. 400,000 applications received. Everyone from 18-year-old recruits to 70-year-old veterans. They know it is a one-way trip. They are fighting over who gets to go. "That is insane," Velkov said, but his voice held awe rather than mockery. "That is humanity," Okonkwo corrected. "We are not built from genetic advantages or long lifespans. We are built from graves. Every person in those graves left a legacy that demands we be worthy of it. When we tell soldiers about this mission, we do not ask them to die. We ask them to buy victory for everyone who comes after, just like everyone before them bought the chance for them to be here." The council approved the operation. 15 species contributed forces, but humanity provided the core strike team. The 60,000 volunteers were selected from the 400,000 applicants. Each one was given an ancient human tradition. They could carve one name from the memorial onto their armor. One ancestor, one fallen comrade, one stranger whose sacrifice inspired them. Private Jessica Webb, 20 years old and Marcus's granddaughter, carved her aunt's name onto her chest plate. "Major Rebecca Webb," she whispered, "I will make you proud." When the fleet launched 3 weeks later, Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of the flagship, enduring memory, and watched 60,000 humans jump toward probable death. Every ship's hull was covered in names. Not just soldiers, but civilians they had saved, worlds they had protected, future generations they were fighting for. The mission would take 48 hours. The entire galaxy watched and waited. Marcus Webb stood in Memorial Station, looking at his daughter's name carved in stone. He was too old to fight now, but his granddaughter was out there. His son had volunteered too. Half his family was on those ships. "Come back," he whispered to the stars. But he knew the statistics. He knew the odds. Most of them would not come back, but they would win. He believed that absolutely, because humans had been doing impossible things since. They learned to throw rocks at predators that were bigger and stronger and faster. They had been turning graves into grit for 10,000 years. The Devourers were about to learn what that meant. In the Zarvan system, the human strike force hit the first defense line. Ships exploded. Soldiers died. But they pushed forward, always forward, never stopping, because stopping meant the dead had died for nothing. And that was the one thing humans could never accept. The galaxy held its breath and waited. Somewhere in council chambers, species that had lived for millennia prayed to gods they barely believed in anymore. Prayed for the fragile, short-lived humans who had volunteered to save them all. Built from graves and grit, rushing toward death, refusing to quit. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Hour 39 of the Zarvan operation. Admiral Chun watched her tactical display through smoke and sparks on the bridge. Of 500 ships, only 12 remained. Of 60,000 soldiers, 8,000 were still alive. They had fought through bioship armadas, navigated asteroid minefields converted into living weapons, and punched through defense networks that evolved specifically to kill humans. But they were still moving forward. "Strike teams, report," Chun ordered. Her voice was steady despite the burns on her arms and the blood on her uniform. "3rd Battalion combat ready," came Colonel David Webb's voice. Marcus's grandson commanded the Marine assault ship. "We are down to 2,000 effectives. Ready to breach the target. Engineering corps ready," Lieutenant Zhao reported from a damaged frigate. "We have enough plasma charges to crack the planet. Getting them to the core is going to be challenging." Challenging. That was Marine slang for definitely fatal. Chun looked at her bridge crew. 16 people, average, age 24. They all knew what came next. "All ships," she announced on fleet communications. "Final phase begins now. We do not need to survive this. We need to succeed. Remember why we are here." She pulled up casualty reports from 3 years of war. 43 million dead across all council species. 18 million humans. Hundreds of worlds scarred or destroyed. The Devourers would keep growing, keep consuming, until someone stopped them. Today, someone would stop them. The remaining ships accelerated toward the Nexus buried deep in Zarvan Prime's crust. The final defense layer appeared on sensors, a biological megastructure that made everything before it look easy. What happened next was reconstructed later from sensor logs and AI recordings. No human survived to tell the story firsthand. The assault fleet hit the defenses like a hammer. Ships rammed through organic barriers, while Marines ejected in drop pods. The Enduring Memory and 3 other capital ships formed a spear point, their reactors glowing red as they pushed through fire that melted armor and boiled atmosphere. Admiral Chun stayed on the bridge until the ship's hull breached. Her last transmission was simple. "Tell Earth we got here. Tell them it was worth it." Colonel Webb led the ground assault personally. His battalion dropped straight into the planet's upper mantle, using thermal shields to survive temperatures that vaporized metal. The Devourers threw everything at them. Swarms of infected defenders, biological acids, tremors that shook the ground, and open chasms beneath their feet. The Marines carved through it all. Every meter was paid for in blood. Webb's helmet camera recorded his final minutes, holding a choke point while engineers pushed past him toward the core. He emptied his weapon into a tide of Devourer forms, reloading again and again until his ammunition ran out. When the claws tore through his armor, his last words were clear. "Aunt Rebecca, I am coming. Tell Grandpa the debt is paid." The engineering team, 9 people led by Lieutenant Zhao, reached the Nexus core. It was massive, a cathedral of living tissue and pulsing neural networks, the brain of the entire Devourer hive. They planted plasma charges in a ring around its base. The timer was set for 30 seconds. Zhao knew they would die in the blast long before they could escape. Her final log entry was recorded calmly. Charges set. Timer active. To whoever finds this recording, we won. Make it count. Lieutenant Anna Zhao, signing off. The explosion split Zarvan Prime to its core. The Nexus died in a flash of plasma fire that registered on sensors 100 light-years away. Across 300 infested systems, the virus swarms suddenly stopped coordinating. Without their guiding intelligence, they became nothing more than scattered animals. Dangerous but defeat-able done of the 60,000 humans who began the operation, 19 survived. 19 people pulled from drifting wreckage by Council. Rescue ships that arrived too late to fight, but in time to bear witness. The galaxy mourned 60,000 heroes. Humanity added 60,000 names to the memorial. 6 months later, High Arbiter Zalmoth stood before the completed Victory Monument on the Council homeworld. Every species had contributed to its construction, but the design was human. A massive stone arch with a single word carved in every Council language. Remember, why this design? He asked Sarah Okonkwo, who stood beside him leaning on a cane. Her injuries from Zarvan had finally caught up with her age. Why not celebrate victory? Why focus on the dead? Okonkwo looked up at the arch where names from all species were being etched. Because victory is not what we leave behind. What we leave behind are the people who bought it. If we only celebrate winning, we forget the cost. Forget the cost, and eventually you stop thinking it is worth paying. But surely, Zalmoth pressed, surely now that the war is over, humanity can stop being what you are. You have proven yourselves. You do not need to sacrifice anymore. She laughed, a tired sound. We will always be what we are. Every species thinks they are defined by their advantages. Corinthian honor, Salthrine longevity, Vex regeneration. But humans? We are defined by our disadvantages. We are fragile, short-lived, and breakable. So we learned to make that enough. The dedication ceremony began. 1,000 representatives from every Council world gathered. When time came for the human remarks, a young woman in a fresh Marine uniform stepped forward. Private Jessica Webb, she introduced herself. Granddaughter of Colonel David Webb, great-granddaughter of Major Rebecca Webb. I ship out to the reconstruction fleet next week, helping rebuild the worlds we saved. She looked up at the monument, at her family's names carved there among millions. My great-grandmother told my grandfather stories about the soldiers before her. He told my mother. My mother told me. They say humans are built from graves and grit. That is true. But what people do not understand is that graves are not endings. She placed her hand on the stone, a name stretching back through human history. They are foundations. Every person whose name is here, they are not gone. They are holding us up, pushing us forward, reminding us what we can do when we refuse to quit. She smiled, fierce and young. You want to know what makes humans different? It is not that we are willing to die. Many species can fight until death. What makes us different is that we are willing to die and make sure it matters. We turn our dead into legends, our losses into lessons, our graves into the bedrock we build the future on. The ceremony continued for hours. Each species honored their fallen, but only humans stayed until every name was read. All 19 survivors of Zarvan were there, along with millions watching from Earth. When the last name echoed in the silence, Okonkwo stood before the monument one final time. She was 81, ancient by combat standards. She had outlived most of her generation. To all we have lost, she said quietly. To the 60,000 at Zarvan. To the 18 million in this war. To the 63 billion throughout our history. We are still here because of you. We are still fighting because of you. We will remember you. She added the old words, adapted from prayers spoken by humans across centuries. We will remember them. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. In the void between stars and on worlds, yet unnamed, we will remember them. We are built from graves and grit, and we will never forget. The monument stood eternal. Humanity was not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the longest lived or most advanced, but they remembered. They learned. They adapted. And they never quit. That was enough to save the galaxy. In every generation that followed, when young humans asked what made their species special, the answer was always the same. We are not special. We are just stubborn. And everyone who came before us was stubborn too. So when things get hard, when the universe says you should quit, you remember that 1 billion generations of humans said no. That is not genetic advantage. That is legacy.